Overthinkers of Reddit, what unlikely scenario actually came true that you were completely prepared for because you were an overthinker? Story 1. Not me, but my mother. Apparently, at a party where my parents and their friends were playing board games, there was a realization that an hourglass was missing from one of the games they planned on playing. My mother proceeded to reach into her purse and pull out an hourglass she just so happened to bring, on the off chance they didn't have one. However, later in the night when some drinks had been had, someone accidentally slammed a drink down, breaking my mother's hourglass. Without missing a beat, she reached into her purse and pulled out another hourglass. She knew the first one, being glass, might get broken, so she had a backup ready. Story 2. One time, I way overthought a concern I had around dryer vent fire. When the time came that we had a clog, didn't know, and there was a wee burst of flames, I was ready. Story 3. I definitely have to hand it to this OP for thinking ahead of time about what to do for their pets. A lot of kids might not have considered it. That said, it must have been the worst evacuation anyone's ever suffered through. Have you ever heard the noise guinea pigs make when they're scared? It's hard to describe, but imagine if the velociraptors from Jurassic Park sucked up a whole bunch of helium. Then picture something about 1,000 times more annoying than that. I know people who like those potato rats get even more into them than most people do with their dogs, so I'm not trying to offend anybody. Besides, I'm sure they'd sound even more annoying if they caught fire. But even the most dedicated animal lovers should be grateful they weren't stuck in the car with OP's family that night. Story 4. I carry scissors in my glove compartment. They came in handy when a kid tightened a skinny zip tie around my 9-year-old's finger at a park. Completely cut off the circulation. Also, the other kid's mom was a nurse, so that was helpful too. Carry scissors and a nurse at all times. Ah, crap, I forgot to pack my nurse. They fit better in the trunk than they do the dash. Story 5. Funny thing about overthinkers, we might spend a lot of time preparing for random catastrophes with absolutely no reason to suspect they'll happen, but the fact that we think a lot doesn't mean we're actually all that smart. At the very least, we occasionally demonstrate the vast differences between intelligence and common sense. Case in point, you have to wonder if the girl still would have noticed his one-gun salute if he hadn't stood up in the middle of a movie to pull it up into his waistband. This dude looked discretion in the eye and ran 1,000 yards in the other direction. Besides, he didn't need to have his boxers on backwards for this situation. Cutting a hole in the bottom of the popcorn tub would have been far more useful on a number of levels. Story 6. This was at 9 years old. We had driven home and seen the beginning wisps of smoke for the California Cedar Fire in 2003. Naturally, I assumed the worst, and packed up all my clothes and spent about an hour making a travel cage for my guinea pigs. I tied their water bottle to the side so they could drink, packed up their food and their favorite furniture just in case. I then spent the next few hours monitoring the fire on the news, and out in the distance from our window, periodically asking my parents if we needed to evacuate. At some point in the night, the fire sped up like crazy, and was literally on the hillside across the street. I went into my parents' room and said, "The fire is across the street, are you sure we shouldn't evacuate?" At this point, we all went crazy, grabbing important documents and supplies, and as we were about to lock the doors and drive, I realized I forgot my guinea pigs. My parents told me it was too late, and I didn't have time to grab them, but when I cried and explained I had them packed up, I was able to grab them and go. The house ended up okay, thanks to a neighbor putting out embers before they took, but we were gone long enough my pigs wouldn't have made it. Too long didn't read, helped save my family and pets from a fire because I was an anxious child. Geez, you were a smart 9-year-old. Story 7. When 9/11 happened, my brother, who was 5 at the time, began packing a bag in case we had to escape a terrorist attack. He packed the essentials, like his teddy bears, a VHS copy of Phantom Menace, his favorite toy cars, and a random book my dad was reading. He would have single-handedly saved Western civilization. Your piggies were lucky to have you as their human. Story 8. I bought and learned to use a Slim Jim, open locked doors. I carry one in my car and have been able to help no less than 10 people who have locked their keys in their car. My brother was visiting me from out of town, and he needed something from Target. He called me and said an elderly man had locked his keys in his car, and I was able to drive over and help. Also have jumper cables that have helped start a few stranded drivers. Story 9. I've met stage magicians and tarot card readers who aren't as enthusiastic about their cards as this OP, who says they don't even play cards that often. I also couldn't help but notice that they use the Overthinker slogan just in case. The difference is that they actually specified that they brought the unopened deck in case the open cards became too damaged or hard to shuffle. A lot of people wouldn't go through the trouble of considering the specifics. Usually it's simply just in case, followed by your judgmental friends challenging you. In case of what? I'm not a psychic, how am I supposed to know? Just in case is just in case. In this particular case, they never could have guessed that someone would need an unopened deck of cards for a highly specific purpose. This is why the universal just in case is the only justification you'll ever need. Story 10. I've never told anyone this, but when I was in middle school and going through puberty, I used to be terrified of getting a random erection and my fly being down accidentally. Like I would be up in front of class and then randomly get an erection and it would just pop out of my fly in front of the whole class. It's making me laugh just typing this out. You know that episode of South Park where Jimmy keeps getting random stiffies? That was basically my life. Usually I would just tuck it in my waistband and wait for the storm to settle, but I still had the huge fear of it popping out of my fly because I forgot to zip it up. So what did I do? I started wearing my boxers backwards so that even if I forgot to zip up my fly, my schlong wouldn't be exposed. It was a pain to use the urinals, but honestly, I got used to it pretty quickly. Flash forward a couple months, and I was at the movies with a big gathering of people. It was basically a big group of girls and my group of guy friends. Each guy and girl paired up and made sure to sit next to each other. I was paired with the girl I had a huge crush on. We shared a popcorn and soda, and it was a huge moment for me. Briefly into the movie, I got one of those dang random stiffies, and I quickly but discreetly stood up and did the old waistband tuck. When I sat back down, I could feel it pop out through my zipper. Thankfully, my backwards boxers kept it from saying hello to my date, but I still panicked and had to cover up in a hurry. She noticed, but I think we can all agree that a 6th grade boy's Woody hiding under a layer of underwear is better than just sprouting out bare in the middle of a crowded movie theater. Also, she never said anything to her friends about it. Shout out Stephanie for not mocking me with her friends. Story 11. Went through a stage as a teenager where I thought I was psychic. I know, stupid. A friend asked me jokingly to make a prediction. I told him to get a flashlight because tomorrow would be dark. I grabbed one myself when I got home and put it in my purse. No idea why, just did it. The next day, the Eastern Seaboard blackouts happened. He still asks for predictions to this day. Well, what's going to happen tomorrow? Wear your seatbelts. Story 12. I carry a fire extinguisher in my auto. I witnessed a car accident where the engine caught fire. I quickly put it out before it burned the inside of the car. Everyone survived. What's a car-safe fire extinguisher that can withstand being left inside in summer heat? I'm concerned the compressed gas propellant might burst. They make them for cars and can survive the heat, and going on 2 years now in the green on pressure. Stored in my trunk in a car that is parked outside all the time in up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit weather. Story 13. The first one doesn't actually sound like a bad idea for most people. Hand or finger injuries can be pretty common, and it's awful feeling like you're at the mercy of the elements until you heal. Sure, you aren't completely helpless, but for some reason, having to awkwardly do things with the wrong hand is more humiliating than not being able to do anything at all. This strategy ensures that won't be as much of a problem when it pops up. However, learning echolocation might be taking it a bit far. You'll almost definitely hurt your dominant hand at some point in your life, but going blind seems perhaps a bit less common. Story 14. In college, on occasion, upperclassmen would randomly steal the underclassmen towels from the shower stalls and then lock their room doors so that they had to go to the RA bare butt. I had the idea to stash a towel in the drop ceiling tiles for just that event. Maybe a week later, I became the victim of a towel snatching. However, the upperclassmen were very unhappy to see me strut out with a nice clean towel for my ceiling stash. Something similar happened to me at my sorority house, but I just showered for a really long time till they got tired of waiting. I sang and sang and sang. They were my friends, and they knew I didn't mind being naked. Okay, I'll just use up all the hot water then. Story 15. I always keep an unopened deck of cards in my backpack. You never can tell when some hold'em may be needed to pass the time. But when I was at a business conference, the bigwig who was presenting to us was having to wing it with a few things because his luggage had been lost. And he didn't have all of his materials. He had the PowerPoint deck, but he didn't have his props. He started going into explaining how he'd be able to demonstrate the statistical principle he was describing, only he didn't have the unopened deck of cards he needed. Voila! I was able to produce a shrink-wrapped deck of cards. My boss was also in the same presentation, and he was also impressed that I just happened to have a deck of cards on me, so that's nice too. Specifically, an unopened deck? Like, if you get stuck waiting and play a game to pass the time, you just bin the cards when finished and buy a new deck? Nah, I add the cards to my collection at home. I usually keep an open deck on me as well, but just in case, I have an unopened deck. But once they're getting worn and aren't so easily shuffled, I either pass them off to kids to play with, or if it's warranted, toss the deck. Anytime I do wind up opening my sealed deck, I replace it with another. I buy them in the larger box of bicycle decks you can often find at Costco or whatnot. So the sealed deck gets replaced, the deck I just opened becomes my new open deck, and my previously opened deck is rotated to my home collection. You'd think from this description that I play a lot of cards. I actually don't, and especially not this last year, obviously, though my 6-year-old is becoming a pretty darn good gin, cribbage, blackjack, or poker player. Story 16. I'll buy the bit about the subconscious picking up on signs of impending danger. That said, I don't think it really matters in a case like this. If someone's got something strapped to the top of their vehicle, you're better off not driving behind them. Even if something in the back of a truck looks like it's been secured, or that it's heavy enough not to fly off, you really never know. I once saw a dryer on the highway, or a washing machine, I'm not sure which, but it clearly fell from somewhere, and the fact that it was still in the middle of the road means the driver never stopped or came back, because you know there's absolutely no way they didn't notice that thing crashing onto the road behind them. Story 17. I am an amateur clarinetist. I've played in the local orchestra and the like. My son was in the high school band, also played clarinet. Prior to a football game at the warm-up area, he called me as I was about to head to the game, saying that someone in his section had a problem with their instrument. So did I have a loaner? Now, the thing about being a clarinet player is that everyone you know calls you every time they see a cheap plastic clarinet for sale at a garage sale or the like. So over the years, especially when my son was in junior and senior high, when I saw one of those for $50 or $100, I grabbed it. Didn't happen every day, but at the peak of my collection, I had a couple of beater plastic clarinets, in addition to the pretty good wooden one my son played. And Lord knows I wouldn't trust anyone with my good clarinets in B-flat and A I used in orchestra. So I grabbed both of these plastic jobs, which actually played okay, and brought them. I pulled the one I thought was the better of the two out of the car and gave it to my son's friend. Meanwhile, he says, "Hey, another person ran into a problem," and I got the second clarinet out of the car. "How many clarinets do you have?" was my son's question. It was a proud moment. I've noticed a trend amongst some musicians to just slowly accumulate instruments. I have a friend with a couple acoustic guitars, a couple electric guitars, a pretty nice bass, a frankly unsettling number of banjos and ukuleles, and by far the largest gong I've ever personally seen. Story 18. Getting lost in a foreign country. Relying on phone GPS to navigate, data stops working. Had overprepared and memorized the map of the downtown area ahead of time. You can download areas on Google Maps beforehand. It's super useful when traveling abroad. Story 19. A fair number of people who go to jail do learn their lesson, but it also partly depends on the nature of their release. Those sorts of offenders are supposed to have probation or parole requirements in most states that keep an eye on them, restrict their internet use, and require regular therapy with a pretty specific curriculum. If he had gone through all of that, you'd think it would come up in this story. But the really messed up part is that, ironically, this OP might actually have been lucky that he had a weapon up his sleeve. I'm not sure if pepper spray falls under some kind of special exception, but if he'd simply been approaching to say hello, she would have assaulted a guy for no reason. It sounds like there were pretty specific circumstances with this guy, so hopefully going around blinding anyone with a crush on her isn't a common default. Story 20. It needs to be said. The commenters on this story are no less toxic than OP's family. Going around saying, "I told you so," in reference to someone having a heart attack just makes you look like a jerk. And to be honest, it's a little hard to buy this story in the first place. There are a few tropes to look for when identifying fake stories on Reddit. One of them is that the OP gets cartoonishly bullied by every single person in their family that most people would find a little funny for a day or two at max. And even then, only one or two would usually comment on it. From the way this OP describes it, no one in the family had anything to talk about when they were all in the room together besides this one ambulance line. So I guess we actually do need an ambulance, because this OP is suffering a near-fatal attack of main character syndrome. Story 21. I'm basically blind without my glasses, and I've always taken a backup pair of glasses when I travel. It went untouched for years, taking up valuable space in my luggage. Lo and behold, one trip to Montreal a few years ago, I just woke up one morning to find my glasses broken. No idea how it happened, and I finally got a chance to break out my backup pair. I use both contacts and glasses. I keep spare contacts in the glove box, my toiletry kit, and day bag when traveling. Nothing sucks more than being out and losing vision. Came for the validation, did not disappoint. Will forever bring way too much stuff everywhere just in case. Story 22. Injuring my dominant hand. As a kid, I had an irrational fear of having it chopped off. I spent all of grade 6 teaching myself to write and do things with my left hand. I made a conscious effort to remain as ambidextrous as possible. As an adult, I broke a few fingers on my dominant hand. But it wasn't a big issue because I could do most things equally with my left hand. Anticlimactic, but it was useful. Have the exact same fear and have been working on training my left hand occasionally. I'm also trying to learn to echolocate in case I go blind. Story 23. As much as I get why the parents were surprised, it seems unfortunate that they should be. Is it really that common for siblings to hate the idea of a new addition to the family? You see this sort of thing on TV and in movies all the time, but how many kids are actually unwilling to accept the fact that they'll have a new baby brother or sister to play with? It would make even less sense for them to be opposed to it in this case, since the child was adopted and they'd already known her for some time. If anything, you'd expect the kids to miss her at that point if she wasn't adopted. Not trying to say that what OP did wasn't great or touching, but praising what they did shouldn't hinge on the tired stereotype that all siblings hate each other. They seem to on Reddit sometimes, but that's because it's the toxic stories that get clicks. Story 24. A couple of stories like this have come up, and it's worth saying that you should never feel like you're overthinking on things like this. Having first aid supplies is not overthinking. It's actually highly recommended that you keep things like this in your car. It's kind of like the one OP who thought they were overthinking by teaching their family what to do in case of fire. That's pretty vital information, and it's actually weird that so many people are content to let their kids do fire drills at school, yet never teach them what to do at home, where a fire might be more likely. As with that story, this OP's example is a good one to follow. Story 25. Honey, the neighbor's screaming and running into walls again. Story 26. When I was 11, I always kept approximately 12 to 15 of some combination of pens, pencils, and markers in my pant pocket. Just liked having options and never knew what I was going to need to write on. Sometimes got some side-eye from other kids though. Cut to at a weekend camp with a bunch of kids. I'm participating in a sort of scavenger hunt race thing. At one point, our teams hits the task where everyone has to draw or write something. Don't really remember. But there's only 2 pens. About 10 people per game, and another team just showed up. With 1 pen assigned to each team, it's going slow. Until, you get a pen, you get a pen, everybody gets a pen. Our team screams through the task because we can all write simultaneously, while the other team's left plodding along with their 1 pen. We eventually win. Who's weird now? You. You're still weird. Just kidding. I mean, you probably are weird, but aren't we all? Having pens and pencils will also make you popular anytime you travel abroad. I always seem to forget mine and find myself sucking up to the nearest person with a writing utensil. Story 27. Once had to trade my gummy worms for a crayon. Story 28. To be fair, there might not have been an issue if the school wasn't listing their students' pronouns on the door. What purpose does that serve, other than to prove they care about pronouns? If someone knows you well enough to know your room number, then they should already know you well enough to know what gender you are. I know the internet recently had a field day with the term assassination coordinates, but this school is seriously going around posting rapist markers on the door of every young woman in the dorms. And even putting that aside, it's weird that anyone else cares if this OP wants to lock her door. It's not calling her neighbors untrustworthy. Although if they are trustworthy, they shouldn't be able to tell the door is locked in the first place. You know what? Between that and the creepy wino, it might actually be time to move. Story 29. The death of a family member. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, when overthinking turns into repeatedly mourning for family who are still alive because how would I feel if I never get to see them again? Story 30. I was once driving on the highway behind a car with a couple of kayaks strapped to the roof. My anxiety brain kept saying, what if they fall off the car, Final Destination style? I tried to convince myself that it was an irrational fear, but the anxiety got the better of me and I decided to change lanes and make some distance. About 30 seconds later, cue kayaks, they both slip off the roof and go rolling around the highway. Luckily no one was hurt, but man, that did not help my anxiety at all. I definitely do the Final Destination worries thing too. Usually a big truck piled with giant logs or something. You wonder if some part of you unconsciously registered that the kayaks had been shifting some way. I've read that your body can pick up subtle signs of impending doom in various ways that can make you afraid, even if you're not sure why. My roommate fits this one exactly. She passed a log truck in Washington State, and less than 30 seconds later, they spilled out on I-5. She talks casually about it like it couldn't have killed her. Story 31. What would I do if my neighbor's house caught on fire? I said I'd make sure my kids were safe and panic, and then we'd run if the fire got close. My neighbor's house caught on fire, and I sat outside and watched it with my kids and panicked. Story 32. I work in childcare and was working at a center that was so draining. I started applying for new jobs and went on a couple interviews. One time I had an interview with another daycare and was offered the position. I loved my coworkers and ultimately decided to turn the new position down. However, I had this gut feeling that I couldn't burn any bridges in case stuff at my current job hit the fan. So when I turned down the new job, I made up an excuse saying I'd love to take the offer but couldn't because of XYZ reason, but would be in touch sometime in the future. Lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, stuff hit the fan at my work. I took a month off and then emailed the job that offered me a position and started 2 weeks later. I missed an interview when I had COVID. Now the company won't even look at my applications. Even after I explain the situation, they won't consider me, which I guess is fair since it's their choice. That's called dodging a bullet, friend. Most people don't find out their potential employer totally sucks until after they get hired. Mace. Story 33. A person I worked with was a registered offender, and he had a thing for me. I told him multiple times that he made me feel uncomfortable and to stay away from me. For some reason, I had nightmares about this dude. He was 6.5 feet tall and freaking hideous. Anyways, he said he was going to stop at a store that I stopped at all the time after work, and it was obvious he knew my direction when I left. I pull up to this store, and he's already there. Walks up to my car, and I just roll down my window and spray this dude, and he dropped a billy club out of his sleeve. Everyone always told me to stop being paranoid and stop thinking he's going to attack me or grape me, that he's been to jail and learned his lesson. Screw that dude. He should have never been let out of prison. For reference, I'm also a 6-foot-tall dude who's always prepared for the worst. I did not expect that last line. Story 34. When my wife and I were getting married and looking for a place for ceremony, we found this beautiful but quite remote garden. We were signing the contract for the event, and I kept thinking that it was quite remote, so I asked, how much time does it take for the ambulance to get here? I became the laughing stock of both families. My then future mother-in-law, who was present at the meeting, literally fell down from the chair laughing. The wedding organizer remembered it for weeks, telling about it everyone we met. My dad ended every sentence with, "But maybe you need an ambulance for that." My wife was making siren noises when I was saying something we disagreed on. Every family dinner, all the aunts and uncles were checking if the ambulance was present. You name it, the entire package. Still, I couldn't get rid of this weird feeling. It would have taken over an hour for the ambulance to get to the garden. After a few weeks, I ended up paying a private ambulance to be present at the wedding. Fast forward to the ceremony, as my wife literally walks down the aisle at the back of the garden, I see 2 paramedics running with a stretcher and my dad squeezing my hand, whispering, That's none of your goddamn business. Let them take care of it. What happened was that one of our older guests got a heart attack and almost died at the ceremony. Was saved by the private ambulance. Ever since then, when my wife tells me that I'm overthinking, I just do the siren noise. That is such an orgasmic level of told you so that you can milk it for literally the rest of your married life. Not just his married life, don't forget his family and in-laws. Wow, that's more than overthinking. That's next level psychic abilities of gut intuition. Holy cow, do I hope you pull out the I told you so every chance you get. Story 35. When I had a tumor removed a couple years ago, I kept the surgical blue vomit bag thing they gave me just in case in my car, in case anyone ever got sick while I'm driving. Last winter, I was on a third date, driving on the highway back home with her, and she was feeling like she was going to throw up. Could not find the blue vomit bag. Felt dumb telling her where to look when it was in my center console all along. She ended up ralphing in a grocery bag that luckily didn't break. Overthought and forgot. Story 36. I keep my gym bag in the car so I have a dry outfit after getting into a water balloon fight with my nephews. Also, I carry Band-Aids, tissues, Benadryl, and stamps, which I give out frequently. Kids skin their knee at the zoo, got a bee sting, runny nose. Forget to mail the kids FAFSA or your tax return? I got you. Are spontaneous water balloon fights that much of a concern? If so, awesome. Story 37. COVID. I worked at a medical uniform and supply store years ago, and they were moving locations. They decided they weren't going to sell face masks anymore and were going to throw boxes of them away. I asked if I could keep them, just in case. They've been moving with me for about 5 years before I actually used the masks. Story 38. Made my kids rehearse for a fire. We had rope ladders, escape routes, and a meeting spot. Everyone should. January 17th, 2018, we put it all to the test. I thank God every day that we all made it out because we were prepared. Overthinking and anxiety for the win. I keep a fire extinguisher in every room of my house after being underprepared for a grease fire. Thankfully, it didn't get out of control. Someone broke into my house while I was in the shower finally, so I screamed, "F yeah, I get to use my shower gun." All I did really was charge the dude naked while holding a Glock, but the sheer look of terror on his face was priceless. Story 39. So maybe not quite this, but my little sister. Through a long series of events, my parents, who were not foster parents and not looking to adopt, ended up taking care of an infant who was not at all related to us, whose mother had just died. It was only supposed to be for a few weeks until she could be moved to a more permanent placement. As soon as I found out that my parents had agreed to help watch her temporarily, I knew where this was going, and I had all the initial adoption application paperwork printed out before she ever got to our house. Needless to say, my parents were pretty surprised the day they said they were thinking of adopting her, and I handed them a folder of forms and my handwritten notes on how the process worked. For the record, she has legally been my little sister for 7 years now. As a parent, I'm sure your parents were touched not only by your preparation, but by the way the gesture indicated total acceptance and support for your sister becoming your sister. I think they were a bit surprised that we all accepted her so quickly. I am one of 4, now 5 siblings, but we all love her, and honestly can't imagine how we could have ever let her go. Story 40. I carry some of just about everything in my purse. We were at the beach during off-season, and a kid wiped out. I had everything needed to clean and bandage him up. I carried that stuff, renewing when it got old, for almost 20 years before actually needing it. Thanks for the awards. Story 41. I have a similar experience. I have just about everything you could possibly need to survive in the car if it breaks down or something else happens. I was driving, and an old couple was crossing a driveway headed home after a nice lunch out. The lady biffed it on the curb. She had ripped quite a bit of her skin and was bleeding all over the place. I saw them, pulled my car over, and was able to hop out, clean her up, and bandage everything up. It felt really good to be prepared and help the frantic old couple. Someone stopped and helped my parents after my mom tripped and face-planted on a walk with my dad. She had bruises, a split lip, and broken glasses that cut her nose. Thank you for stopping to help someone, since I don't know who helped my parents. Story 42. Role-playing game in real life. Can't relate. She used the consumable instead of saving it until the end of the game. What if she had later found a more badly wounded child on the way home? I always carried an extra juice box and snacks and an extra set of clothes during high school because I was always worried that one of my kids in my school with diabetes might get low and need some sugar for the juice box and snacks. and I might get dirty or my clothes would get ruined, the extra clothes. Well, one day the kid in my class with diabetes did need the sugar. As luck would have it, a few days later, a girl in my class was having a really bad wardrobe malfunction and couldn't wait for a new shirt, so my extra large t-shirt acted as both a shirt and a dress for her. Story 43. I carry birdseed around with me to feed the ducks on campus because I worry about how much rice and naan the students are feeding them. One day I'm on my way to campus and I see a lady with her toddler who's fascinated with the birds, but it keeps hopping away every time the baby toddles forwards. So I stop and tell the mom that I have birdseed in my pocket if her kid wants to feed the birds. It wasn't until later that I realized that from her perspective, she was in the park with her kid when a stranger approached her and announced, "I have birdseed in my pocket." This is protagonist behavior. Love it. No, super ironically, that's a guy who just featured as a deus ex machina in 2 other protagonist stories. Story 44. My partner tells me I overthink and overbuy groceries because I have an intense fear of not being able to provide for my daughter. When COVID hit and the shops were out of stock of everything, guess who was the one supplying food and toilet paper to said partner? Story 45. I was in dorms my first year in uni, and people always thought it was funny that I locked my door at night. We were all pretty close, and I was insinuating people were thieves and untrustworthy. One night I heard someone fiddle with my door, and I peeked through the peephole and saw someone I did not recognize. Turned out he got drunk in the nearby bar, managed to sneak into the building, and tried to sneak into multiple other girls' rooms. Our names and pronouns were listed on the door. Click on one of the videos you see on the screen now, or a Karen will sue you.